Good to see you, Ken.
Everyone, welcome, and thank you for being here. We're going to start in 5 minutes. We'll wait to see if any other people try to get on. The thing I just want to be sure to remind everybody, we are recording these meetings. They are being posted on our webpage. So please understand you're on the record, and so keep in mind what you're saying, what you're doing, things like that. If you use the chat, that is also part of public record. So please keep that in mind as you're writing any comments. We ask that you be sure that your name is up on the screen. And, Brian, thank you very much for putting City of Beaverton up there and knowing your role. And Ken, if you're not going to be wearing your parent hat, if you could put Washington County up there, so
yep, I will switch that now.
That's recognized as and you're here on your official role, and we will be getting going here in just a moment. And if you do need to take a break or anything like that, go ahead and freeze up your video and take care of whatever business you have. And we will have plenty of time for conversations and questions and the like, but in the meantime, if you would please, keep yourself on mute until we're ready to have that dialogue. And if you do have specific questions as we're talking, feel free to post them in the chat room, so that way we can keep track of them. And if whoever is speaking sees them and can, wrap them into the conversation, we will do so. Any kind of questions on the logistics side of things before we get going here in 2 minutes? All right, not seeing any. I do have one item. Alfredo, this is your first meeting. You were unable to join us last time, so while we have a minute, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and, and the like.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stephen. Yeah, my name is Alfredo Moreno, and I have a daughter who just started kindergarten at Arco Iris, the Spanish immersion school. I live in South Beaverton, and I'm the community relations manager for Portland Community College's Rock Creek campus. I'm also the incoming co-chair of the Five Oaks Museum Board, which also has its meetings at this exact same time on Tuesday. So I asked Stephen if he was me, which would he attend meeting 1 or 2? And he said I'd be able to catch up for meeting 1. So I've been studying and hope to hit the ground running with y'all tonight. So I'm glad to be here.
Great. Welcome.
Well, as we agreed last time, both Kimmy and I, are amazed that you guys don't find this subject to be as interesting and as all-consuming in your life. I know Brian and Ken, you guys are planning nerds like the rest, like Kimmy and I, but this is really interesting stuff. Okay, I'm letting in our final couple of people. Okay, so Leroy, if you want to go ahead and put up the first screen of the presentation, we will get started here.
Did everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Looks good.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I will continue to keep an eye out for any late guests here, but I think we're all present. So welcome to our second meeting of our focus group here. We have a lot of information to present to you here tonight, and Leroy and Frank and the rest of our team will be here to fill you in on what materials we have for you. And we do want to spend a lot of time here tonight going through your questions, going through your comments, and hearing your opinions on what we have presented to you for tonight's evening. Something that I really do want to be sure you understand is what we have presented here is the staff recommendation for a future capital bond program should the board want to proceed with one. The emphasis here is that this is the staff recommendation. We're here tonight to get your thoughts, questions, opinions on that recommendation. We're not asking you to vote on any of the options. We're here to get basically a temperature check on you, the community, and well-informed community, what you think about it. Does something look good? Does something look bad? Is something missing? Do you need additional explanation? Whatever it is, this is here for you tonight to help us understand what you out there in the community think, and what priorities are, not only at your own schools, but also what we talked about in terms of need at the last meeting. And we will go over that briefly here this evening, is just to recap the need part. But it's going to be very important for us to hear what kinds of thoughts, questions, et cetera, that you have on what we've been putting forward here. We have received questions from many of you, and we are going to do our best to incorporate the questions that were raised in the presentation. If you don't hear that, it's not that we're ignoring you, it's that we may be answering those questions later in the presentation. Leroy and team understand that we do want to get to your discussions and questions. So if we're going kind of quickly through some slides, it's only to get to that point where we can begin our conversations with you. So with that, I will invite Leroy to take over and begin our presentation.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So here you see our agenda for this evening. We're going to give you, and we've kind of covered that, a quick welcome back. After that, we're going to talk very briefly about the bond history for the district. Frank is going to touch on that. Then we will and at the end of each of these sections, by the way, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask some questions if you have any questions about that section. So each of the sections will be finished with an opportunity for questions. That'll be followed by a very, very brief overall summary of need. This is really covering the material that hopefully all of you, if you don't remember it from the last meeting, you've had an opportunity to kind of maybe refresh your memories for 30 minutes or so prior to this meeting. Then we dive right into the key part of this, which are really the plan proposals that Steve made reference to, some of the thinking behind it. And then we hope to spend roughly the last hour gathering some input from you. And just to sort of reiterate Steve's point that he made earlier, these are preliminary proposals. We're not asking you to necessarily pick one over the other or anything like that. What the district is really interested in is hearing your response to the proposals to gather whatever input you may have. And in fact, as Steve mentioned, we've already received at least a couple of emails that had some fantastic questions, some great points that were brought up. And those 2 emails have already started some discussion amongst the district steering committee with regard to really thinking about the questions that were asked. So your input tonight means something to the district. It is very, very valuable. And we really want to thank you for coming back for the second meeting and really committing your time for this. So let's kind of dive in here. Our key goals for this evening are really getting this high-level review of bond history so you can understand how the proposals fit into kind of the scheme of taxation, so to speak, how it really fits into the bigger picture for you and your community as taxpayers. Second goal is really for you to understand these preliminary proposals for 2 options and some of the rationale or logic behind them. And then item number 3, again, is really to gather as much feedback from you as we can. And I'm going to say this probably a couple of times tonight just as a reminder, but the district has sent out a Google Doc, has made available a Google Doc. And that Google Doc has really some key prompts or key questions. And we would really encourage you to get into that Google Doc and give us your opinion or your answer to each one of those questions. And you can type as long or as short as you want, but that's really very important because it's going to give us, above and beyond the conversation this evening, hopefully some really measurable sort of answers that we can take back to other district stakeholders. And for those of you who are maybe having trouble getting into that Google Doc, I'm going to offer up Steve here as the point of contact. Please reach out to Steve. Let him know that you're having trouble, and either he or he will connect you with someone who will help you get into that Google Doc because it's very, very important to the process. So quick welcome back and review. For those of you who were here before, you may remember kind of we are Malum Architects and also Angelo Planning Group, and we are assisting and facilitating with this long-range facility planning process. And as you will remember, we are working very closely with kind of a core leadership team at the district who have been really giving us information regarding district need, which you're seeing summaries of, and we really meet with them to prepare for these meetings and to put together presentations that explain their planned proposals for you. And here are all of you. Again, we thank you very much for committing some time out of your very busy days. Welcome back. And we are in meeting number 2, which is the preliminary plan. And if you may remember, the long-term schedule will be asking you to come back one more time. And the purpose of that is to really share back with you any adjustments that may have been made in the plan based on not only your input, but also some broader community outreach that we plan to take after this second meeting with you, the focus group. A quick overview of need. Again, this is a very high level sort of summary. You probably may remember kind of our 3 major areas of need, the 3 buckets: educational program, enrollment and capacity, and facility condition, and how there are lots of different components or types of need within each one of these buckets, and how the need is really informed by the overall goals of the district and the community regarding education. And that is really intended to help the steering committee and also you begin to formulate what might need to be done with facilities to support those educational goals. So out of this intersection of these 3 areas comes the long-range facility plan, which is a strategic phased plan rather than, say, a knee-jerk Band-Aid approach. And as we talked about last time, no district can ever afford to fix it all. So really the key here is to develop a prioritized strategic phased plan. We're looking primarily at phase 1. Essentially, you can kind of think of that, although there have been previous phases, and kind of looking a bit forward into the next phase for most likely next possible projects along the way where we can do that. And the kind of core idea here is this is all about really striking a balance between what the community can provide in terms of capital support through passing various capital measures, and how that capital is really spent on various types of need in the district, whether that need be modernizations or renovations of existing facilities, whether it's building new schools to add capacity, purchasing properties, and a whole plethora of other possible need out there. So quick overview of some summary of need, which I'm sure all of you probably remember. We can touch back on that as we go farther into the plan work, but right now we'd like to kind of hit on a brief bond history for the district, and Frank Angelo is going to cover this little section, which will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions.
Thank you, LeRoy. Good evening, everyone. Again, Frank Angelo, Angelo Planning Group. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I'd like to give a broad overview of the capital bonds that the district has realized last year. First, starting with what is a capital bond. Beaverton, the school district, has historically used general obligation bonds to fund most of its capital limits throughout the years. The district has been on a pattern above every 6 to 8 years as bonds are paid off to go back to voters to refill those and to continue construction programs. Voters in the district generous with the district in that time frame, and have approved a number of general obligation bonds over the years. The obligation GO bonds are debt security, and they're issued by the district and are backed by the full faith and credit of the district, which simply means that when they're approved, the district promises to pay them back. They're used to finance capital expenditures as opposed to funding operating expenses such as salaries, administrative salaries, and things of that nature, which are really not appropriate to be paid for in long-term general obligation bonds. And the GO bonds, once approved, are supported by property tax levy. The bonds are issued for a number of capital needs such as land acquisition, construction, new schools, renovation, improvements of school facilities, and equipment intrinsic to the facilities, such as technology and things of that nature. And the bond duration normally averages about 25 years. So these are longer term commitments on the part of the district to expend the funds, and the projects in effect should at least be such a nature to last for the 25-year period. Next slide, please. The most recent bond was passed in 2014. This bond was an outgrowth of a bond advisory committee that relied on the long-range facility plan that was adopted by the district in 2010. The $680 million bond that was approved by district voters in 2014 at the time was the largest bond approved in the state of Oregon. That has since been surpassed by Portland Public Schools bonds for $1 billion. But at that time in 2014, it was a watershed moment for the district. These are the categories that the projects that fit in, that were included in the bond fit in: educational programs, enrollment and capacity, improving facility conditions, such as replacing schools, modernization, and other support such as adding classrooms to existing facilities. The map shows the distribution of the bond projects that were approved in 2014. The red being the new and/or replacement schools, and the pink being where modernization occurred. As you can see, the bond and the projects were spread pretty evenly throughout the district. Next slide, please. Some of the prominent projects in the 2014 bond were included 4 replacement schools, that is tearing down existing schools and rebuilding them, and that occurred at Vos, Hazeldale, William Walker, and is now occurring at ACMA. ACMA is under construction. Is the last one of these projects to be constructed. The bond also included 3 new brand new schools on a vacant property: Sato, Timberland, and Mountainside High School. So a number of projects were large projects were included in that in the 2014 bond program itself. Next slide, please. So the current status of the district's bond debt is shown on this slide. You can see in 2020, the bond rate is about $1.96 per thousand assessed value. It will go up a little bit in the next 2 years, but then a dramatic step down in 2023 will occur, and that will lower the tax rate at that point, if nothing is done, to around $1.60 per thousand. That's the step down that I talked about earlier, when the district every 6 to 8 years has gone in. When this occurs, they look at opportunities to perhaps refill to either the existing tax rate or an additional tax rate on top of that. The 2 plan options that we'll be talking about tonight address the 2023 step down, one with a maintain the current tax rate approach, and the second with increase the tax rate by 25 cents per thousand. And both of those approaches include and have identified proposed projects that would accompany those 2 bond scenarios. So that's an overview of the current bond status of the district, and some of the history behind some of the, in fact, the most recent history in terms of the $680 million program. So, any questions? Say BH. Let me open this up.
We do have a couple of questions. I know Eric asked a question in an email earlier today, wondering about compression for Beaverton School District if the increase were to be put forward. We do have more freeboard to ask for in terms of rate increase under Measure 5 and 50. We're not near our maximum mill rate. So that is always a concern. So whenever we're looking at, through our history, at least in terms of requesting for bonds, it has been refilled, but due to our escalating need, that's the reason why we put forward an option of asking for a 25-cent increase. It could go more, but I think that would be just way too much.
Hey, Steve.
So Eric, did that answer your question? And Brian, I'm sorry I cut you off.
I was just going to say that general obligation bonds are not subject to compression.
Okay.
Once they're passed by the voters, they can rise beyond the compression levels. Only the local option levy and permanent rate are subject.
Okay. And that's why Brian's here. He is the pro from Dover when it comes to this kind of question. In fact, we may hire him away from Metro, right?
Maybe someday.
Yeah. So the question we have here on the chat is, Beaverton High School appears to continue to have significant needs, but is listed as receiving major modernization. What was the major modernization at Beaverton High School under the 2014 bond? Aaron, I'm looking in your general direction.
Yeah, I figured that's coming my way. So I wouldn't really characterize it as having received a major modernization. For that slide, the threshold was a $10 million investment over the course of this bond. And I would say at Beaverton High School, we're probably barely over 10 million. And that involved all sorts of things. It was HVAC and roofing, it's kind of all throughout the building, but it didn't involve any sort of major modernization of the school. It was end of life equipment that had to be replaced, that sort of thing.
The
Aaron,
cafeteria, is that in
But that was the previous.
I could speak to that if that's okay, if you don't mind. The library, which I used to work in, is arguably the most beautiful classroom in the entire district. And that's just my
Yeah, good
opinion,
point.
having worked in that room.
That's a great point. So that includes that the library upgrades were a donor project through the BHS Success Fund. So the money expended at school did include that money. So that also funded a new concession stand, which gets lumped into the $1 million number. So it's a good point.
So Aaron, how about the roof repair over the gym? Was that insurance money, general fund money, or bond money?
Nope, that was a good question. So it was the truss failures. The trusses and the gym were failing and needed to be, I mean, they were literally settling and had for a short period of time.
Okay. So Jason has asked a question here about lessons learned from 2014 about the expenditures and overages and what can we use in this time of planning. I think that is going to be a better question to answer later in the presentation, because with the numbers that we have prepared, I think Aaron and Josh can go into more depth in terms of the lessons learned from 2014 and how the plan that we have developed responds to those lessons learned. Unless, Aaron, you have something that you'd like to hit right now.
No, I mean, maybe I'll give just a general statement. It's a super fair question, and really, you know, the lessons learned from the current bond and some of the overages that we had really informed the way that we put together and did the planning for this package of projects. So very aware of some of the shortcomings in terms of planning from the previous bond, and really don't want to be in that situation again. And so I've put a lot of effort into doing more detailed, thorough early planning and cost estimating to go along with some of these projects.
And for any of you who remember the problems with PPS and their bond, we're not doing that. We're going with the, you know, the aggressive conservative numbers, not the lowest possible number. We've learned from that mistake as well from a neighboring jurisdiction. Okay, so any other questions here about the bond history? Kenny, are you raising your hand for a question or itching your ear?
I'm raising it. I've got a question, but I'll defer it until a little bit later in the presentation.
All right. All right, please continue.
Okay. All right. So we're going to take a look at, is that right here? Yes. Summary of district need. Is that correct here? Yes. 3 buckets of district need: educational program, facility condition, enrollment, and capacity. You've all seen the diagram. Just to kind of hit in sort of one slide each of the key pieces of need that we're aware of this point. From an educational program standpoint, there are particular areas of known facility improvement that could be made to support educational program goals. These key areas that have been identified by the district include special education, early childhood education, PE district support, which you'll see later, including things like transportation, buildings, and those sorts of things. The possibility of removing portables and or pending enrollment need at some point in time, replacing them with permanent capacity. And other various program adjustments, but there are these key programs to sort of remember. That's the takeaway here. The district really feels very strongly that every decision made around educational programs, and really everything in terms of capital expenditure and onward, needs to be viewed through the lens of equity, and to really see how that is tracking across the district. We've been using district tools to sort of understand where need exists and where capital has been spent. There are a number of schools at the elementary and high school levels that are significantly below the square footage targets. So that would be not only overall square footage, but square footage per student as one metric that has been identified in the district ed specs. So you may remember the ed spec is really a document that's developed by the district at each grade level, elementary, middle, and high school, that establishes a number of parameters specifically associated with that grade level. And one of those metrics is how large the school is for the number of students it has. So the older schools are sort of underserved from that metric. When we start to look at what this really means in terms of potential cost, and please keep in mind that all of these numbers are really rough order of magnitude estimates, but they'll get you in a general ballpark of what we're looking at. District-wide educational adequacy, this is really the square footage per student issue. If you compare all facilities across the district against the ed spec standard. And this isn't to say that you're going to make all of the schools bigger schools to align with the ed spec, but it gives you an idea of where equity lies in the district. Is approximately $260 million of modernizations that could occur relative to that particular metric. Special education, there are special education facility additions at 12 elementary, 7 middle, and 3 high schools to align with the district standards, and also a potential for a new or modernized standalone special ed facility. And so these are the two numbers you're looking at for the first group of projects. The additions to individual schools throughout the district, you're looking at around just shy of $100 million for that. And then the standalone special ed facility, if it were constructed, somewhere between 14 and 20 here again, to be more conservative. And it leads back to the point that was just so this is preschool classrooms and associated support additions at 8 elementary schools to provide that preschool program at all Title I schools. That's approximately $13.6 million to bring those programs to those Title I schools. PE, these are gymnasium and multi-purpose room additions that could be added to 14 elementary, 2 middle, and an option school. And these would be really geared towards providing a number of teaching stations that would adequately accommodate student enrollment at being the key requirements which are being phased in by the state over the next few years. And then finally, again, that idea of at some point potentially removing portable classrooms and or replacing them with permanent capacity rooms when enrollment would really warrant that. And at this point, for the most part, as you're going to see, capacity enrollment is a lot less of an issue. And so this last line item is probably a bit less critical relative to the previous line items. Moving on to our second bucket, which is facility condition. We know that there are 5 facilities that are more than 75 years old. That's not necessarily saying that an old building is a bad building in every instance, but it does give you an idea about the possibility of systems in the building sort of reaching the point of their expected life, and whether or not the level of replacement of those systems reaches a point where you either have to do it and modernize the building significantly or possibly replace that building, depending on how extensive that modernization needs to be. We know that 13 facilities are in what might be considered unsatisfactory condition, which means the facility condition index, the FCI score, is greater than 30%, and that 30% represents greater than 30% of replacement cost. That's just as a reminder of what we're looking at there. And that's an industry standard kind of metric, that FCI metric. This is indicating the potential need for replacement for those facilities that are exceeding that. It's not saying you have to, but it puts them on the radar where you might consider replacing them rather than modernizing them. Of those facilities or schools, Raleigh Hills K-8 is the worst with the highest FCI number, followed by ISB, and then there's a tie between Cedar Mills Elementary School, Terra Nova, and Transportation South. 2/3 of the facilities are below the goal of seismic life safety. As you may recall, and there are a number of different levels or categories. District has identified this goal of life safety, and 10 of the 2/3 facilities, 10 facilities throughout the district are actually below collapse prevention, which is the lowest and most risky category relative to seismic. 16 facilities have an energy use index rating of 5. And what that really means, as you may remember, is that for those facilities, there's the greatest opportunity for energy use improvement, which is really an operational cost sort of consideration. So whenever you would spend $1 at any one of these 16 facilities to do a modernization, and if part of that $1 involved work that would improve their energy use, you would be getting the most value for your $1 spent, so to speak. And then finally, the overall district facility condition need that's really coming from number and calculation associated with all of the modernizations to replace or repair those deficiencies is approximately $610 million. So amongst that facility condition need, there are a number of known line items that we have made reference to before, but we feel it's important to remind you of. The deferred maintenance items, again, which is the FCI related, or the $610 million. So this is what it would take to repair and correct deficiencies at all facilities, of course, except the new facilities that were just built. The second area involves seismic upgrades to those facilities that are falling below the district target for seismic safety. In order to bring all facilities throughout the district up to that level, it's estimated to be around $268 million. For security upgrades, the known upgrades that have been identified, which would include things like adding cameras, improving or putting up fences, and various other security measures throughout the district, equate to approximately $12 million. And then nutrition services, which are upgrades to school kitchens at various schools throughout the district. There's a known need of approximately $5 million for that particular line item. The final bucket, which is capacity and enrollment. There are 5 elementary schools that are more than 60% below the target capacity of 750 students. So what that really means is for those schools that are significantly below that target capacity, on the positive side, the glass half full, those sites represent opportunities if you were to say replace the school to get a higher or better utilization of that site, which of course comes with other associated planning strategies that would need to accompany that. I was kind of trying to carefully think about how I worded that. So that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that if you have a school that is that far below the target capacity, it may have some questions regarding not only the efficiency of its operation, but in some instances, maybe the robustness of its programs as well. So there's that possibility. Second bullet point is that projected enrollment. Again, we have this 10-year enrollment projection report, which takes us through 2031. Is expected to decline overall at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. But having said that, there are several schools, individual schools in the district that are projected to have significant enrollment growth, and there are a few others that are projected to have significant decline. And so we're not going to show you the map again of which one those are. That map was included in the original presentation, so you can go back and refer to that if you'd like. But overall, it's pretty schools within the district that vary from that kind of flat enrollment. And it's very important to note that district-wide, there is existing capacity to accommodate the projected enrollment over the next 10 years. However, there are, again, these several individual schools that are projected to be significantly over or under enrolled. And so there needs to be some strategy to manage that. And there are multiple strategies, which I'm sure will come up in conversation tonight as we look at the different plans. And then a couple of detailed line items under capacity enrollment. These are known line items and assumptions. And you can see the little footnote at the bottom that says these known line items and assumptions really reflect the concept of managing enrollment within specific school boundaries. So what that really means is these ideas reflect managing enrollment that is certainly a point for consideration and discussion that I wanted to point that out so that you understand where these line items are coming from. The first one is the idea of adding classroom and gymnasium capacity at a couple of different schools. So these are classrooms at Sato and also Stoller Middle School, and also adding an additional gymnasium at Stoller to accommodate the enrollment at that school without rebounding. And then the second line item is for adding classroom capacity at Oak Hills to accommodate enrollment and remove portables there, which would be projected at $5 million. And then finally, the other support need, which is outside of those kind of three big buckets. There were several line items that we have mentioned previously within this other support area, one of which is technology. So this is student devices and infrastructure district-wide. The total need there is estimated to be around $53 million. Bus replacement, which is really the idea of continuing replacement that has been ongoing with buses over previous measures. And this continues a $2 million a year replacement cycle. Need there is $14 million. Critical equipment, so maintenance equipment, athletic equipment, and so forth. The need there is approximately $8 million. And then school office relocation to improve security at Aloha High School, Westview, and Cooper Mountain, approximately $10 million for those modernizations. Now, that's an overall view, and I know there were a lot of numbers there that we don't certainly expect you to remember. It's really reminding you of the big picture of the various items, and from an order of magnitude, what we're really talking in terms of district-wide need. The next 3 or 4 slides are really a quick reminder of those guiding principles, which the district is using to establish priorities and to begin to develop plan proposals that address that need. So I'm going to walk through these slides relatively quickly. The guiding principles fall under these kind of larger areas of expecting excellence. So strategically planning for maintenance, modernization, and replacement of facilities with an emphasis on strategically planning, making sure that regulatory requirements, kind of tracking along with the idea of maintaining the community's current investment in the facilities. Don't let them continue to waste away, so to speak, because there is a large investment already that the community has made in the school district. Really consider cost benefit of not only anything you do in the district, but specifically with regard to those schools which warrant consideration for potential replacement rather than large scale major modernization. And so consider those particular schools very carefully. And expansion needs in existing facilities throughout the district. So that's the capacity and enrollment, keeping on top of that. Under the overall umbrella of innovation, updating the ed specs, which we referenced earlier, to reflect the evolving needs of your educational programs. Item number 2 is really make sure that the facilities that you are providing for your various programs are as flexible as possible in order to accommodate change over time. And then the third bullet point is really making sure that any proposals are incorporating and thinking about, say, sustainability, energy efficiency, and durability and maintenance, of course, over time. The concept of equity, which is definitely a focal point for the district, and with all decisions really being viewed through this lens, is to make sure that planning decisions are viewed through that equity lens, with the goal of creating a greater parity across districts, across the facilities throughout the district. And really, as you plan for these upgrade and improvements, to make sure that parity and equity is fairly distributed across the district. Really what we're doing hopefully here tonight, incorporating, once we get to it here, your comments, and coming up with a plan that is really appropriate and can be supported by the community. And as part of that too, considering providing community amenities that support partnerships with other agencies and providers within the district. So are there any questions about that really quick high-level flyby of need and guiding principles before we dive into the plan proposals?
Ken, you have your hand up, so why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you. In looking through this, I'm not seeing any proposals for any new schools, including in the southwest part of the district, the Cooper Mountain area. You know, I know in the first presentation you mentioned the Forward Stride property. What am I correct in seeing that this plan is not assuming any new elementary schools in either the southwest or the northwest portions of the district?
So let me take that one, Leroy. Yes, you're correct, Ken. We are not proposing any new capacity in terms of a new school. So as we mentioned at the last meeting, we have 3 vacant parcels across the district. The Forward Stride property is the newest one. We did acquire that for a future elementary school. We have, with the capacity that we created at Hazeldale Elementary School, we have enough room to accommodate growth on that site for the next 10 years of growth. As the city develops its plan for the rest of the Cooper Mountain area and looking at densities, we may be coming back at a future date in our next long-range plan as needing a school site at that location. It really is going to depend. We're not expecting the same kind of student growth that we have experienced up in North Bethany. The student growth that we've seen in the River Terrace area has not mimicked the North Bethany growth type. So we feel fairly confident that we'll be able to accommodate what growth that does happen in the next 8 to 10 years at Hazeldale or at Shoals Heights. Shoals Heights.
Okay, and then this is also probably a longer term question. Currently, not all of that Cooper Mountain annexation area, or Middle Cooper Mountain, Upper Cooper Mountain, whatever it's being called, not all of that area is inside Beaverton School District. Some of it is Hillsborough School District, even east of Grabhorn. Is there any long-term discussion to switch the boundary as you did with the southern Cooper Mountain portion?
No, in fact, the discussions that we have had is that the boundary will remain where it is, that we're not considering any kind of trade or swap or otherwise move that boundary line. It will remain, that western part of Cooper Mountain will remain in Hillsborough School District.
Okay, thank you.
And as Brian has noted for all of us, it's just Cooper Mountain.
Steve, are you also tracking the chats? I'm not tracking those.
Yeah, I'm tracking the chat.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions, or shall we move into the plan proposal?
Let's proceed.
Okay, great. All right, so now we'll dive into the kind of meat of this for your consideration. So as Frank mentioned earlier this evening, there are currently 2 different proposals on the table. And of course, these will take into consideration and as appropriate adjust according to input that the district may receive. Plan option number 1 is the no tax increase. So you may recall, Frank mentioned there's going to be a drop coming up, a step down in the next couple years. And so this essentially refills that bucket to maintain the level of taxes as they currently are today. And that bond amount would yield approximately $325 million, which would be spent over a 4-year bond program timeframe. So that's when the projects would really be implemented over approximately a 4-year period. The second plan option looks at a 25-cent tax rate increase. Some of the earlier, I think, thinking about this, of course, there are many different options, once you move away from just a no tax increase, but this one is sort of approximating, so to speak, the previous 2014 bond level. So you recall that one is approximately 680 million. This is about in the same zone in terms of a bond yield. So that's why I think it was really identified as a possible second option. So it increases 25 cents per thousand of assessed value. One way to think about that, I think, is, for someone who has a home that may have a high market value, but its assessed value, if you pick a number of, say, $300,000 or so, that increase would equate to approximately $75 or so per year. It's about $625 a month or so, to give you a feel for what impact that would have for 300,000 of assessed. The yield on that is $725 million that would be spent over a roughly a 7-year bond program timeframe. So looking at very quickly kind of the details of the no tax rate increase, falls into several larger categories, which generally correspond we've identified. So if you look at the first two, they're really directly associated with facility condition. So under the first component of facility condition bucket, there were several facilities that were identified for possible replacement, one of which is Raleigh Hills Elementary School for $44 million. There's an additional $11 million roughly coming from the previous bond measure to add to that. One of the transportation centers, and then the high school replacement. But please note that in this particular approach, it's only the planning and design, the preparation for that high school that would be done, not the actual replacement of the facility itself. So it's prepping for a future, most likely a next phase of work replacement of that high school. Below that, you see again within the facility bucket. Oh yes, go ahead.
Roy, for Brian, for your purposes, this is going through the design and entitlement process, but not the actual construction.
Yes. And under that is a second grouping of projects for facility condition. These are repairs. You can think of it like that, deferred maintenance that's being done. Other school modernizations that might make improvements to learning space, interior learning space, lighting, replacing old finishes and so forth to improve just the overall environment. Seismic upgrades, 20 million, security upgrades of 6, and nutritional service upgrades of 5. You can begin, if you can sort of remember back on the overall total district-wide need for each one of these categories, roughly how large a bite at the apple for each one of these are taking. Gives you a sense of that. Under capacity and enrollment, you're seeing here classroom and gymnasium additions, which we'll talk about in the details of these in just a moment. Other support, you see a whole list, technology, so forth, and then various fees associated with it, and then the contingency applied to the overall project. And this ties back to one of the points that Aaron was making earlier regarding lessons learned and making sure that not only the baseline estimates, but also adequate contingency is included in the cost, so you don't get in a bad situation where you're implementing the projects. Hitting really fast, plan option 1, and just sort of the reasons behind why some of the major items were identified. Raleigh Hills Elementary, the whys are really, it is one of the highest or worst scoring facilities in the district. It's in critical condition. It's one of also the oldest schools in the district at 93 years. The only other school I think that's older may be the high school, the Beaverton High School. It's one of 4 elementary schools with seismic grading below collapse prevention. It is a very poor performer, no surprise from the standpoint of energy, and represents a high opportunity for big improvement there. More than 40% of the students who attend the school are eligible for free and reduced lunch. It is, the existing school capacity is 250 below the target 750. So there's an opportunity for a higher efficiency of use of site. And it was identified as the next priority in the previous bond plan. So it was discussed in the previous bond measure as being one of the next likely schools to be replaced. Whether or not that represents a promise or not, I don't know, but it has been identified previously. The second kind of replacement is Allen Street Transportation. It is also one of the worst scoring facilities from a condition standpoint in the district. It's more than 50 years old. There are a number of kind of safety related concerns associated with it. The bays are cramped. They are not very modern in terms of the technical aspects of the facility. A third of the lifts are unusable or unsuitable. and technicians are using jack stands to prevent buses from lowering below safe working heights. So there are a number of things in that facility that are need to be addressed at some point, some of which are safety items. Deferred maintenance of the $110 to $130 million range. This is repairing district-wide projects across the district. The individual ones have not necessarily been identified yet, but it's really, those will be prioritized in sort of a next step, so to speak. There is significant need for ongoing repair. The investments are really too large to be covered by general fund, the repair, so it's only through a capital measure. And there's a recommended expenditure of almost $30 million annually to maintain buildings based on the facility condition assessment that was done by another third-party consultant. School modernizations. These again are improving the interior facilities to make them better learning environments. So there are a number of different aesthetic and condition repairs that could be made, things involving improvement of lighting, television, AV equipment, and so forth. Seismic upgrades. As we know, safety, as it should be, is a district priority. And really what one of the goals is, for, at least for new facilities, is to really construct new facilities up to an immediate occupancy level, which means they could function as safe refuges after a major seismic event, but to really upgrade existing facilities to life safety. And there are a number of older schools that don't reach that standard and need to be addressed at some point. And there is an Oregon revised statute that really references this, and the district should be working toward this and really have all of that work completed by 2032. Security upgrades. This is interior camera upgrades, and just to make sure that all areas of risk are really covered. Replacing and repairing fence, which I mentioned earlier, and secondary level access control at high schools and middle schools to improve getting in and out of the building and interior building security. And then nutrition service upgrades, addressing kitchen safety issues, and improving efficiencies, and a kitchen remodel at Beaver Acres. Reduce the number of lunches and increase instructional time. So this is really areas where the cafeterias are too small and they force too many lunches over the course of a day, which impacts scheduling and educational delivery, and then really improving equipment and food storage capability. Classroom and gymnasium additions. These are the classrooms at Sato, and then the classrooms and gym at Stoller. And then adding classrooms at Oak Hills. This is accommodating enrollment at those specific school sites. Even though district-wide enrollment, there is enough capacity to provide increases over the next 10 years. The goal here is to maintain class sizes that are appropriate for each level, maintain the current student body composition, which brings up the question of boundaries and that sort of thing. Address the state of Oregon physical education requirements, which is the gymnasium component at Stoller, and accommodate early learning program at Sato. So that is the summary again of the Plan 1, and now I'm going to jump to Plan 2. Right after this, you'll see the comparison on a line-by-line item, line-by-line standpoint of what is changing. So the areas in blue that are changed are impacted by the larger proposal. So Beaverton High School now becomes not just planning, but a replacement. And that replacement is a replacement of a high school at the EdSpec target number, which is 2,200 students. It also allows $52 million rather than just planning. And to do that, there would have to be reductions in other line items if you felt that it made sense to actually do the replacement rather than just planning and design. With the other facility modernizations, deferred maintenance, there are increases there. School modernization receives increase, seismic upgrades receive increases. Again, trying to get closer to the district-wide in each one of these categories. And then security upgrades also see an increase. Classroom and gymnasium additions bump up. And you can see the categories here: bus replacement, critical equipment, and technology bump up here for this total of $724 million. So why high school? Why replace it with the new high school for 2,200 students? The thinking behind that is Beaverton is the worst F scores in the district. It's in critical condition. It's in the top 5 schools overall in terms of the worst schools. And the majority of the existing building is 105 years old. It's the only high school with a seismic rating that falls below collapse prevention, which is the lowest category of seismic rating. It has a EUI score that really suggests that it represents one of the larger opportunities in the district to improve energy efficiency, and that's an operational cost consideration. And 51% of the students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. The elementary replacement, again, this is just planning and design, or if you were to reallocate money from other categories within the $720 million bond, you could replace it. The idea here is that you would look at possibly replacing Cedar Mill and West Tualatin View with one new elementary school for 750 students. So you would basically combine those schools. Why? That's the rationale behind that is that these 2 schools, Cedar Mill is really one of the worst FCI scores in the district as well. It's in the top 5. West Tualatin View, while it's not in the top 5, it's not too far behind from a facility condition standpoint. The existing school capacities are more than 60% below the target size of 750. So here you see Cedar Mill is very small. It has a capacity of 750. West Tualatin View is 375. So considering combining these two, it has some efficiency considerations as well. Both of these schools are substantially below the district immediate occupancy, which is the highest level, but they're also below really the target for existing facilities as well. Cedar Mill has a very poor EUI score, and about 11% of the combined student body are eligible for free and so here again, this sort of high-level overview of the $724 million approach. It falls out. We're getting right to the end here to start to receive a bit of input from you. We did want to show what this sort of relates to. So Piper Sandler, who works with the district to develop these options, provided this chart, which illustrates the $725 million bond and the 25-cent increase associated with it. And so you can see by this chart that a vote for this would push tax rates up for a period of 7 years beyond the current tax rate, at which point, and they would be up around, I'm kind of guessing here, about 240 or so. And then at the end of the 7-year period, step down that you see here. And at that point, the community could then reassess whether or not They wanted to maintain the lower tax rate 7 years from now, or whether or not there is another backup potential capital measure. So essentially the community gets another choice again in 7 years. That's the basic idea. It refers back to the point that Frank made earlier, that districts typically have a bond cycle, so to speak, and the debt is amortized across time to really reflect that bond cycle and create future opportunity. So that's what you're looking at here. And so you see that 725 million amortizing over time with the 7-year step down. And then just as a side-by-side comparison again of option number 1 and option number 2, we can come back to this slide too when we're going back through any questions or any comments you might have. So we may refer back to this. I won't cover it again right now. So a couple slides here. One is if you have any specific questions about this section, and then if there are questions, we can address them. And then if not, we'll move to the next slide, which is really more of an open discussion, could certainly include questions. And we also have some specific prompts or questions that we would love to hear input from all of you relative to these specific prompts as part of the overall conversation. Are there any specific questions about the two plans? And I'm going to move to the prompts as well while you're asking the questions.
Hey, everyone. So if we're ready to move to the prompts, that's fine. But there was a lot of information there in terms of the recommendations that we have as staff. And so let's dive into it. This is where we would really like to hear from you on how you're feeling and how you're thinking. I see that Abhijit has raised his hand, so please go ahead and raise your hands digitally or in person. Make sure it's nice and big so I can see it, and or you can type your questions into chat. So Abhijit, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Rod, for the presentation. So first off, Steve, I want to use the Google Docs, but I had a longish feedback, and I think I sent it to you. So that document is with you, and feel free to share or make part of public records as you see fit. So this is a good time to give feedback, right, and not just ask specific questions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So if you can go back to, as I give my feedback on that plan proposal, just plan 1, I think slide 35. So before we talk about taxes or anything, I think my first comment is we really need to focus on, are we spending the money at the right place at the right time and considering the district's goal, right? So when I look at this plan or even the other plan, I don't see any line items for the education needs. It's about replacement and facility condition. Now, there are 2 important macro level signals that I wanted to talk about that has come from districts data, right? First is when we talk about building a new school for elementary or adding classrooms, districts data shows that in 2030, district will be 2,500 students below its permanent capacity. Right? In other words, there will be 3 elementary schools worth of capacity unused in 2030, and that's first macro level signal. The second macro level signal is when I look at Raleigh Hills Elementary specifically, and again, I'm not proposing a solution, I'm just doing a thought exercise here, so please bear with me. When I look at the 5 elementary schools surrounded, right, McKay, Montclair, Woos, William Walker, and Raleigh Park, if I look at the projections of all 6 schools and assume for a moment Raleigh Hills doesn't exist. We can absorb the Raleigh Hills Elementary School student body population in the neighboring 5 schools and still have 800 worth capacity left, which is 1 elementary, right? So given these macro signals, is it not fair to ask, can this problem be solved by a potential elementary boundary adjustment instead of spending $44 million on that? And I think we should spend on education. I mean, everybody knows preschool programs provide value. It's a universal fact. And in the education needs, you have identified that will actually help Title I schools. So I think that should be prioritized. But it's not just about Raleigh Hills, right? Even the classroom additions that you talked about north, whether it's Sato or Oak Hills, when I look at the schools right next to them, there is enough capacity there because of the declining growth. So do we really have to add a classroom or whatever it is, or can a boundary adjustment solve that? And can we use that funds to really prioritize what the district's objective is to educate, right? Education programs and maintaining existing facilities? So I'll stop here and I'll come back again. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Alfredo, you're going to be next, and I'm going to try and respond to Abhijit's comment on, an equally macro level. Abhijit, as you well know, we can work on balancing enrollments across a district through boundary adjustments. That is a possibility to do. With respect to the specific proposal at Raleigh Hills, that building is a building that is in desperate need of being replaced. And by replacing it with a school building of a size that's consistent with our spec, our educational specification, we will be able to accommodate more students in that building. And that accommodation may or may not include consolidating schools with Raleigh Hills, i.e., another school may no longer be used as a elementary school. That's a decision later on, but that subject, consolidations of schools, boundary adjustments, that is going to have to be a component of the long-range plan, because yes, we can build things, but is that the right choice? So part of the analysis that we have to do as staff and the board has to decide which way, which would be the best way to go. So I'll stop on that, but on the I just to kind of recap, yes, on the macro level, there are other alternatives to some extent that we can take that could accommodate capacity issues. But if we're only looking at it at that one lens of capacity. Alfredo.
Yeah, I just typed this into the chat, but I really just had a very quick question about the educational program needs and those line items, if they were embedded in this or they were omitted from both of these plans. I was just curious about like early education and special education and those types of things.
Right. So with the educational program needs, we are relying heavily on our partners down in the teaching and learning department to help identify for us what their program needs are, whether that's career technical education or early learning or special ed or things like that. And we did receive information from for special ed. We do know that there are plans for early education in terms of pre-K. But part of the problem, for example, with pre-K is understanding the demand for it. So we do have plans for offering ultimately pre-K at all of our title schools. But the challenge with that is we have a couple of schools that are not drawing enough students from that attendance area. That could be explained in different ways. Maybe we're not doing a good enough job of explaining, the importance of it or the availability of it or what have you. But I think we are including in, kind of embedded within it, the educational programming. We don't have anything specific in saying, oh, we want to put career technical education X in this location though. Okay, Kimmy, are you waving your hand?
Yes, I was typing a question, but I can just ask it.
Okay.
On that special ed question, we talked last time about a facility for special education, special needs programs that we currently send kids out of district for now. It looks like that's not included in either of these options. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are doing a kind of a rough order of magnitude type of cost benefit analysis on that right now in terms of what are our transportation costs, what are our staffing costs, things like that, to understand if there is, if it makes financial sense in a very initial high level way, if that would be achievable. There are other options to consider, perhaps, that don't include building a new building, but may include repurposing an existing building. Abhijit will, and you, Kimmy, will recall from the middle school boundary process that we may have, and I emphasize the may, we may have a middle school that we could, repurpose. And that may be an ideal location or ideal use for, that building. It's not to sell property, it's to, could we reprogram it in a way that would be beneficial to our families and our students. Leroy, Eric asked if we could go back to the prompts. Is that possible?
I go in the right direction. Oops, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you need to go to the right.
Direction.
While Leroy is doing that, any other questions that are coming up to you? Jason?
There's a couple of thoughts I had, and I started as we were going through the meeting this evening. I wrote down some random thoughts, and it got a lot longer than I thought. So I'll email that all to you later. But the considerations, in particular that stand out to me are seismic upgrades and the expectation of meeting, 445.400 or something like that by 2032. I'm curious about, in terms of long range facility planning, are there other projects? Because I know that you mentioned in the 2014 project that it was kind of earmarked to replace Raleigh Hills with this potential bond measure. Are there other projects that are on the table that have been discussed that you feel like really need to be done by 2032 to meet that mark?
I'll look to Aaron and Josh to chime in here. From my perspective, we have looked at all of our different needs, and we have, I feel we have spread out the, the highest needs across at least, included in option 2. I don't think we have anything that is, I think, funded in a short way. I mean, I think that will depend on, for example, will codes change to require greater energy efficiency or something like that? Perhaps there's, there will be a greater need in the future. But I think from my perspective, in terms of just long range planning, I think we have presented to you what we need from a facilities point of view. Aaron, Josh?
Yeah, so that's a super good question and something I'm really interested in. I could probably spend a couple hours answering that question, honestly. I would say our plan that we presented addresses most of the needs. There are still some areas that aren't going to be up to the standards that we want, but really getting all of them is just not practical within the constraints that we have here. I mean, one of the big ones that kind of would be outstanding would be Sunset High School. And so that needs to be visited at some point in the future. It's just, it doesn't rise anywhere near the level of like a Beaverton High School or Raleigh Hills. But this plan addresses most of the needs and it gets us pretty close to meeting that standard.
I would just add one just sort of way to think about this question too. I think it's a great question. If you look solely at the seismic component and you look at the total need that has been identified for that district wide. So the need to bring those facilities up to a standard that will meet like the minimum district standard. I don't have it here in front of me, but I want to say it was somewhere around $268 million or so. So if you had 5 separate capital measures that spent $50 million on seismic each time in today's dollars, that's what it would take just for that line item alone. 5 capital measures at $50 million each in today's dollars. So that sort of gives you a perspective just for that one that ORS, and that sort of thought, that way to sort of frame each of the questions around need versus approach is a good way to think about addressing any one of these issues. That particular one happens to be now mandated by the state by a given timeline. So you can see what it will take.
So Alfredo, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so our plan here is,
Oh, I can go ahead. Yeah. I just had a question about how the deferred maintenance line item, especially in option 2, how that affects the overall FCI ratings of the schools, particularly at the elementary level, where I know there's, maybe 7 or schools that were nearing the critical or at the critical. Does that just kind of hold the line there? Or does that move those down any, or how would that impact the overall ratings?
Is that one you want to take, Aaron, or would you
sure.
like me to address that?
I think I can answer that. So the FCI number really is just it's a calculation. It's the deferred maintenance cost in today's dollars divided by the current replacement value of the school, and that gives you the FCI number. So the FCI is completely driven by the deferred maintenance need at each facility.
And a way to think about that is quick background. The FCI, the assessment, the FCA, which develops the FCI, the facility condition assessment, was done just recently by a third-party consultant. That that calculation, as they go through and score the different building systems, so there's a series of systems associated with each building and site, they score those, and based on that score, it calculates approximate cost to repair deficiencies. So if you take one of those deficiencies, let's say take a roof as a deficiency, once you repair that or replace, in some instances, that roof, that particular line item and its contribution to FCI should now be, I'll sort of say, taken off the list, right, for a period of time, depending on what you did with it. So if you fully replace that roof and a roof has, say, a expected life cycle or warranty of 20 years or whatever it may be, depending on the system, then that is going to take that off of that. And so you will see, as you move through a series of phased capital measures, this sort of rolling tally, so to speak, of schools which are addressed, their FCI's numbers improve, and then over time they slowly start to degrade again. So that's kind of how that works.
I would add, Alfredo, I think just as important to reducing the FCI score is that, like Leroy talked about, we had a third-party consultant. They came in, they did that assessment. They prioritized what repairs we needed to do, like in year 1 and year 2. And so having that analysis is very helpful to us. And exactly, ultimately, we would like to reduce the FCI score, but we want to prioritize the need across the district. And such a huge amount, right? You see that 610 million. So I think, like I said, just as important as having that priority list of what do we do that first year, what do we do in year 2, and now we have that data to help inform our decision making.
It's known, for example, I'll just add a bit of a detail to that there are certain improvements. Let's say, for example, a school had an older building or an older boiler that was on the verge of potential failure, catastrophic failure. So that's going to bubble right up to the top as something that needs to be addressed immediately, because it's something that's going to impact the operations of a school. In other words, the school could shut down if that boiler failed. So it's going to boil up into a, no pun intended, as a priority, so to speak, in this very long list of items. And what we're really looking for you from is, if you know, for example, that there is a total of $610 million of deferred maintenance, or really deficiencies, it's better to think of it that way, district-wide. Should the district, and this is a rhetorical question, of course, should the district continue to try and address the repairs and the deficiencies of the schools? And if so, how much of them should be tackled in a given phase of work? 50 million out of the 610, 100 million out of the 610, how much? That's kind of the question.
So I'd like to ask a pointed question to Brian Kennedy, who is on our Bond Accountability Committee. And Brian, I'd like to, you've seen what we've done with the 2014 bond, and have been part of those lessons learned. And taking a look at what we have between option 1 and option 2, does anything strike you as gotta have, it's deficient, or just what are your thoughts on this now that you've seen it?
That's a good question. I think in looking at the two options, one of the things that helped the 2014 bond be successful was how much investment was spread around the district. I mean, we still heard from groups at various points upset that their particular project wasn't getting done, whether it was, say, Cedar Mill Elementary or some of the other projects that came up during the time. And so when I look at the two options, I think, my sense is the option 1 or plan 1, probably isn't ambitious enough. I know there's, from polling we've done at Metro, that being able to go out and say, this doesn't raise your taxes is a pretty significant advantage. But I don't think it goes far enough. And I think one of the things we hear is some of those schools, some of those communities that had been really looking for investment, they're still not going to get what they think they need in that first option, or not for a number of years. Because looking at your tax rate chart, if you go with that option, you really don't have another opportunity to do another bond issue and say it's not raising taxes, I think, until probably 2037. So it's quite a ways out there. So I guess I would lean more towards the second option, because it is addressing more of those concerns. I also think in the in the community as a whole, we've kind of conditioned the public to these school bond projects are huge, and coming in at under $1 billion, I think it sounds small relative to what we've seen in the Portland Public School projects. And the last thing I'll say is, for the criticism on the 2014 bond, I have feelings about how valid some of those criticisms were and in how good of faith they were made. But, the primary the primary target was Mountainside High School. And the problem there was, when you were doing this version of that back prior to 2014, there wasn't a site, there wasn't a design, and a number was kind of plucked out of the air. And then, once you put a number out there, it's stuck in people's heads forever. And the problem was that number was way too low. It was never an accurate reflection of what it was going to cost to build that high school. So I think in terms of dealing with that criticism, I think the number you have for the Beaverton High School replacement feels much closer to the ballpark. And I'm sure probably has a generous contingency built in, because that's also a really different project than Mountainside. So I think that is really smart, starting with a big number, and that, because otherwise, if you look at the rest of the projects, there weren't significant overages. The estimates were, kind of well prepared, used a lot of good information. So that was a lot of words, but those are my thoughts.
So I'm going to take advantage of Brian's introduction of this concept of this question. And Raghav, I'm going to look at you because you've been one of the smartest people in the room here so far, and I'd like to get you on tape. So the question is, between the options, whether it's your own gut check or whether you're talking for your neighborhood or what, where do you, what's your temperature on, option one or option two? And is there something about either list that you really like or find not, that shouldn't be on the list?
So I would agree. I think, was it Brian who just spoke prior to this?
Yes.
I would agree with Brian's assessment that it feels that option one does not address enough, especially when we think about what the level of need that we saw in the original presentation during the last meeting. Now, where I think to me personally, I would vote for, or I would propose option two as the better option. But, thinking where we are currently in the middle of a pandemic, how financially this is affecting everyone, to me, it just seems like a hard sell in general. So I guess my question is, if we were to go with option two, what is the process, and when would that kind of, when would that be put forth to the community?
Right.
That kind of.
I think we need to absolutely acknowledge and keep in mind that we are in a pandemic. We are in unprecedented times with, some pretty iffy economic news. I think those are decisions that I think our board is going to have to weigh and determine on whether or not that is something they want to proceed with. I would ask you as our focus group, perhaps two questions on that issue. One, and Raghav, I think you hedged your bets, appropriately by saying, yes, I can see the need to go with something bigger, something more aggressive. But I'm also feeling that given the economic climate, the pandemic, whatever, this may not be the time to do that. When it comes to referring a bond measure, that is entirely a board decision, and they will refer the measure to the voters. They'd like to perhaps do it as soon as the November election in 2021, but they're not tied to doing that. They can actually do it at any time, but it could be as soon as that. And something to keep in mind in terms of the electorate with these measures in our region, so Portland Public and Newburgh, they did pass pretty substantial bond measures in the November 2020 election. But down in Roseburg, I believe it was, their capital bond measure failed. So it's not a crapshoot, but it is a difficult thing to predict, in any kind of bond measure. I mean, just ask Brian in terms of the Metro bond. It was well, but it didn't pass. So, Michelle, I'm going to look at you in your general direction and ask you the same question in terms of option one or option two. Are there items that you feel really strongly about keeping on the list or not including on the list? What kind of hesitations or real positive thoughts that you may have about any items that we have in our options?
I not surprisingly agreed with a lot of Abhijit's thoughts on boundaries. I thought it was interesting when these plans were designed to assume the boundaries are as they are, right? If I understood that correctly. I thought that was a very, very interesting assumption because you also kept stating that we have adequate capacity. So I think the community would like to see some effort of things being done other than just asking for money. I mean, I think if they said, hey, we're going to address these issues by doing this and this and this, but we still need, I understand facility replacement, the Raleigh Hills. If that building needs to be replaced, then I would say you may want to advertise it like McKay. McKay is also very old and very small. It seems like a good potential for absorption or combining. But yeah, I mean, when you show the lists, and I'm sure the general community has no idea what condition these buildings are in. I looked at some of them and went, wow, I don't know if I want to send my kids back into that building. My kids go to ISB, and as you saw, that's not one of the best buildings right now. So yeah, I agree we need option two's money, but there might need to be some marketing to the community when it gets asked for.
Right. So Eric, I'm going to ask you the same question. What are your thoughts on the options and the allocations of funding?
Well, I look at option one as a Band-Aid. You had that Band-Aid chart up very early in the presentation. Option two seems to me like it offers an awful lot of return on investment. And a lot of people like me who are retired, don't have children in the system anymore, but are still paying taxes, look at deferred maintenance as a no-brainer. You've got to maintain your investment. You've got to have it done. And I'd have to say that, Michelle, you're spot on when you talk about a marketing campaign, which is what it's going to turn out to be. This is going to be a real sales job for the school district, especially in these times. My only advice to the school board would be that maybe November 2021 is not the best time to have this request. In November of 2020, it was a general election. It was a presidential election year. The turnout was tremendous. In 2021, I don't think we'll see the same kind of level of interest. So maybe May of 2022 might be a more interesting time to do it. There'll be a primary then, and that request, if we can hold off that long, and I know a lot of these requests are urgent, a lot of these needs are urgent, but timing is everything, and so is marketing. My thoughts.
Right. Anyel, you turn your camera on just in time. Same question to you.
Sure. Yeah, I guess one question that I have mainly is like, I remember seeing that there's like a timeline difference between these two options for 4 years as opposed to 7 years. What exactly does that mean? Can you go into more detail on what that is?
Sure. So with the option one, we're anticipating, well, under both options, we're anticipating being able to spend down $100 million a year on projects. So whether that might include like the new facility and, you know, a bunch of deferred maintenance, but it is a measurement for us in terms of how quickly those funds would be expended. Is it possible to do, you know, the $320 million over, you know, a longer period? Yes, it is possible. It's not really possible for us within our own, you know, infrastructure, our own personnel infrastructure, to do more than $100 million of projects. That's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, do you want to talk about that at all in terms of just just the oversight, since that is your area of expertise?
Yeah, I'll add, Steve. I think you covered most of it, but Angel, you know, our current bond, we've looked at how much we've been able to execute, and like Steve said, based on our staffing and our ability to manage projects, you know, 100 million is the right target. But it also talks to our, you know, what the needs are of the district, and you can see we have a lot, and so we just kind of focus on that goal for 100 million per year.
That makes sense to me. So I guess what I'm hearing is, so for option one, the funds would be expended more quickly, and then what would happen after that? What would happen after we run out of money? Would it be another committee like this would be put together? We assess the needs again, and we see at that point in time, okay, from here moving forward, what is this going to look like? Is that what would happen?
That's correct. We would have to do the same process, because we would have expended that bond. We would, you know, tied up the money in those projects, and then we'd have, as you know, there's more need, and we'd have to look for more bond funding to help support additional projects.
For that reason, part of me really does like option one. That being for the reason that, okay, well, we can do this, see what happens, and then once these funds have been allocated, we can have some time to see, okay, these are how the repairs went, this is how the needs are going to be happening now, right? Because we have one of the things we've been keeping in mind is, what are the long-term projections going to be for like things like population in Beaverton? What are things going to be, what are projections going to be for population size of the school specifically? I think option one kind of gives that buffer time where we can say and plan later on in the future, once some of those things have started to happen, once some of those patterns have started to really coalesce and we can see them. I think for that reason, option one could be worth considering, though I do see why Eric, for example, says that it could be feeling more like a Band-Aid than anything else.
Right. So I'm looking at Kevin, you're the last one to go on the record here this evening, and I'm going to invite Brian and Ken as, you know, officials from their agencies to weigh in too, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, particularly from the Raleigh Park neighborhood. You're on mute, Kevin.
Sorry about that. Everyone pretty much had great particularly leaning towards the plan two in the process. I think the needs really are incredibly great in the district. I go back with what was said earlier. I think it's all about marketing and getting the word out early and clearly on the needs of the district will be the most important aspect.
Thank you. Brian, from City of Beaverton perspective, looking at our lists, I mean, aside from, the various permitting and entitlement issues that we would certainly have to keep in mind, are you sensing anything that we should be including or excluding in our plans?
Thanks, Stephen. No, I mean, as a city representative, I don't think I have any opinion about one or two or what's in there. I will say you've probably already thought about it, but we're going to be required by the state to allow middle housing throughout the city, which means duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, on a very high percentage of the lots in the city. And Washington County unincorporated the same story. So I don't know that anybody really knows what exactly that's going to mean for population growth, but it's worth thinking about and talking about, and I'm happy to have that conversation. Otherwise, I think I just want to say we're happy to be helpful in identifying any code or environmental or historic resources hurdles or considerations that on the different sites when you start to narrow in on things.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I thank you for that, Brian, and for everybody who may not know this, but in the last legislative session in Salem, there was a bill executed which basically says there's no such thing as single family housing anymore, that or single family zoning anymore, and that in traditional single family neighborhoods you can do up to 4 units in a on a property. It will be it'll be really interesting to see how that actually unfolds in Beaverton and Eastern Washington County. Ken, you may have more insight on this, but I think if we were to see that happen, I would think it is going to happen more in the eastern part of east of 217, just because of their older housing stock and larger lots where that might happen. But we'll see. Ken, so do you have any opinions from the Washington County perspective?
Steve, do you mind if I follow up real quick on the middle housing?
Yeah.
Sorry, Ken. Well, first of all, we're in the middle of a project to implement that law. So you can go to beavertonoregon.gov/HOP for HOP, which is the Housing Options Project, if you're interested, or if my contact information is floating around here somewhere, I'll put it in the chat. You can contact me as well. And there will be some variation where quadplexes and triplexes and such are allowed or likely. Duplexes are definitely going to be allowed in almost every lot. But if you're truly curious about how it might play out, I encourage you to engage in the project. So thanks for the advertising moment.
All right, Ken.
So like Brian, Washington County is just getting started in looking at where we think we might see some of these additional units coming in. In advance of having any of the data, my rough guess on it is that it's not going to be that big of a deal yet, because I'm not sure how many people are going to be willing to take their property and add additional units to it while they're still living there. That we may see some, and we are expecting to see some. We're planning to implement this over the next couple of years. We're looking into it. I wonder from a school district standpoint whether the additional children that you'll see in these new units will just be offset by birth rates that continue to fall. They're at record lows now in this region. They're continuing to fall. What we saw during the Great Recession was that there were a few years when when people's economic challenges led them to make family planning decisions that resulted in far fewer children coming in once those kids got to be school age. Depending on what happens as we continue to slowly climb out of this COVID recession, we may see a similar dearth of children coming in for a while, and that may not bounce back to the same extent that it had been. And I don't know how current the demographics analysis that you had that went into the planning on this, whether it fully factored in all of the impacts of COVID. So again, in the way too early to call category, I would say that new units may just balance out declining enrollment anyway. We may just see the same level of declining enrollment that you're already forecasting, and not something potentially much more severe. From a cost standpoint, my one suggestion would just be to dramatically overestimate your transportation costs associated with all of these projects. The roads need a lot of work. That Raleigh Hills site in particular has got a lot of challenges. I think just across the board, transportation costs are far more expensive than they're initially planned for. So that's just something to, as option one, option two, at the county, we'd know no official position on it one way or the other. And I'll just say that I think there's been a lot of things said from other people about which would be more implementable, which would the voters be more likely to go for. So I don't know that I have anything in particular, but I think that there are definitely some options. I think that the county would support options that are flexible and give the chance for ability to deal with other challenges. That said, that the facility's condition, that's a big number. Over $600 million of maintenance needs. That would be a big number. I don't know what 25 cents it would be the highest that people know. I mean, I just running some rough numbers off of your presentation. It looks like every penny $30 makes a difference, and allows for some bigger projects done in more places throughout the school district.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I want to make a note of the time. It is 8:24 by my laptop, and I do want to let you get on with your evening here at 7:30. this has been a very good conversation for us, and I would like to be sure that we invite you to continue to send us feedback. Please send me email if you don't want to use the Google Doc. If you have additional thoughts as we go along, please, please, please feel free to share with us. The next steps is starting our going out into the community and talking about the need, talking about possibilities for investment priorities. We're not going to be campaigning on any kind of bond or anything like that, but we are going to go out and be heavy on education and informing people of what we are doing. If you belong to any groups that are looking for agenda items, please let me know. I will go on the road, or at least be happy to log into any virtual meeting and give a presentation. This is, again, as I've said before, this is really interesting stuff to me. So with that, before we end here in the evening, Leroy, Frank, any kind of closing thoughts or comments that we need to offer?
I guess I might have a few quick. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming again to this meeting. Also like to thank Abjin and Kimmy for sending 2 very thoughtful emails that really, I think, articulated very specifically some of their observations and concerns. And I would ask that all of you should feel like you do that as well. I think the district and the whole plan would benefit from that very much. I would also reiterate again, if at all possible, try and find your way into that Google Doc and answer questions. And as you do that, as a community member, some of the things we're interested in are when you're answering questions such as, do you see things that are positive or negative? Think of them not only from the need standpoint. Yes, everyone's going to recognize this need, and you are definitely doing something to address it, but also think about it from a political standpoint. Are there things that could end up on a plan that would not be well received for political reasons? Or are there things that should be included in the plan for a political reason to build support and at the same time address a need? So be thinking of those things. And then the last thing I would want to say is please come to the final meeting, the third and final meeting after we've had the outreach sessions, because the intent of this is to garner whatever we can from your input, get it in front of various folks at the district to try and determine whether or not the proposals should be adjusted in some fashion to either address need in a different priority or for other reasons or for political or whatever. And then to take that out to the broader community. And when we bring that back to you in the third meeting, to sort of see if there is any closer alignment or if we're sort of in the same place, and to hear what you think about it at that point again. So please come back. So other than that, I don't really have any other comment.
I guess the only thing I would note, just in addition to thanking everyone for their comments, is that Kimmy and Alfredo had a couple extra comments in the chat room that I think I want to acknowledge, and we will save those and take them forward with us. So
yes, and Kimmy, I just got your note about the outreach information. all of you will be getting the calendar of outreach so you can tell your friends. Hopefully you'll be able to have holiday get-togethers, maybe not, but you'll be able to tell them again that this is a great thing, and check it out. And I will be sending you fairly constant, or at least regular updates about what's going on. I don't want you to say, okay, yeah, we've done this, and then you tune out until March. We really want to keep you engaged and continue to receive your feedback as we move along. So with that, I would thank you again for your time. I would ask that our project team hang on for just a minute so we could do a little quick recap. And have a great week. And thank you for being here.